This is also a time of change for my family.
When a sealed vault hidden deep beneath Windsor Castle was finally opened after decades of silence, what emerged left King Charles visibly shaken and sent a wave of disbelief through the royal household. For years, rumors had circulated about a forgotten chamber buried inside the royal archives. Palace officials rarely spoke of it. Some insisted it was nothing more than an old storage room filled with estate papers and personal correspondence. Others quietly claimed it contained documents that had been deliberately kept away from public view. But according to the story surrounding Diana's final wishes, one particular vault had remained untouched since the night she died. It was not simply locked. It had been sealed. A small brass plaque fixed beside the door carried only a handful of words. For the future, when they are ready. Nobody had ever publicly explained who they were. Nobody had explained what future the inscription referred to. And nobody seemed willing to ask. Until the day came when Diana's sons were no longer children. A forgotten clause buried deep inside the legal paperwork surrounding Diana's estate suddenly resurfaced. The language was obscure, almost deliberately hidden beneath pages of formal legal terminology. Yet its meaning appeared unmistakable. Once her sons reached the required age, certain sealed materials were to be opened in their presence. Both princes were required to attend, and the heir to the throne was required to witness it. That single discovery changed everything. What had been ignored for years suddenly became impossible to ignore. Palace lawyers began making urgent calls. Archivists were summoned. Old files were removed from secured cabinets. Aides moved through the corridors with an unusual sense of urgency. And before long, a gathering was arranged inside one of the oldest archive rooms within Windsor. The atmosphere that morning was unlike anything the palace staff had witnessed before. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke casually. Every conversation seemed to stop whenever footsteps approached. One aide was overheard whispering that the day had finally arrived. Another reportedly asked whether the documents had really been preserved all these years. No one answered. Inside the archive room, Charles stood with William and Harry. For a rare moment, father and sons were together without cameras, ceremonies, or carefully prepared statements standing between them. They were simply three members of a family, facing the legacy of the woman they had lost. Yet there was something else in the room. Fear. Each of them seemed to understand that whatever was inside that vault had been deliberately preserved. And if Diana herself had arranged for it to be opened only after her sons were grown, then she had clearly believed they would one day be capable of understanding something she could not explain to them while she was alive. At the far end of the room stood the royal archivist. He was an austere figure dressed entirely in black, his expression unreadable, his gloved hands resting carefully around an old iron key. He had been entrusted with the final procedure. Charles attempted to lighten the moment. He suggested that perhaps the vault contained nothing more than letters, photographs, personal keepsakes, or ordinary estate documents. But even Charles did not sound convinced by his own explanation. The aides standing nearby remained silent. Several avoided looking directly at him. Then the archivist stepped toward the vault. The key entered the lock. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then came a heavy metallic click. The sound echoed through the stone chamber. William looked toward Harry. Harry looked back. Neither brother spoke. The archivist turned the key. A second click followed. Then the massive door began to move. The hinges groaned beneath decades of stillness. Darkness appeared behind the opening. Charles took a slow breath. He stepped forward. And that was when he saw the first stack of papers. At first glance, they looked completely ordinary. Legal documents, estate records, correspondence. pages bearing official seals, old signatures. But underneath those papers was something that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the room. A cream-colored envelope. It had no royal crest, no official stamp, no lawyer's name. Only one handwritten sentence appeared across the front. "For my sons, when the time is right." Nobody moved. Charles stared at the envelope for several seconds. William's expression hardened. Harry swallowed. Even the archivist lowered his eyes. Charles slowly reached toward it. His fingers stopped just above the paper. For a moment, he appeared unable to touch it. Then he picked it up. The envelope was opened carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter, not typed, not dictated, written personally by Diana. The handwriting was unmistakable. Some lines were neat. Others appeared hurried. Certain words seemed almost pressed into the paper with anger. Charles unfolded the first page. The room fell completely silent. Then he read the opening sentence. "If you are reading this, then the palace has already failed you." William's expression changed instantly. Harry stared at his father. Charles stopped. He blinked several times. For a moment it appeared that he could not continue. Then he forced himself to read on. The letter was not the loving farewell anyone had expected. It was angry. It was frightened. And above all, it was deeply personal. Diana wrote about feeling watched. She wrote about the sensation that people around her knew more about her private life than they should have known. She described conversations that seemed to reach newspapers almost immediately. She described private information appearing in places where it should never have existed. She wrote about friendships that suddenly changed, about people she once trusted becoming distant, about conversations that ended unexpectedly, about letters she claimed had somehow found their way into the public sphere. The more Charles read, the quieter his voice became. Diana's words suggested that she believed the greatest danger had not always come from photographers outside palace gates. She believed some of the danger had existed much closer, inside, among people she had once trusted. Then came the names, one after another. Names of people she believed had passed information to journalists. Names of courtiers she suspected had manipulated the narrative surrounding her. Names of individuals she believed had smiled at her while privately contributing to her isolation. William's hands slowly closed into fists. Harry looked toward the table. Charles continued reading. Then he reached one sentence that stopped him completely. "My demise has already been planned." Nobody spoke. The sentence remained hanging in the room. Charles lowered the paper. William stared at him. Harry's expression became unreadable. The archivist did not move. Eventually, Charles continued. Diana claimed she had been presented with an arrangement that would have removed her from the center of royal life. According to the letter, she believed the proposal was designed to silence her without necessarily destroying her publicly. She had refused. And she believed that refusal had changed the course of everything that followed. Whether those claims were true, exaggerated by fear, or simply the interpretation of a woman living under extraordinary pressure, was impossible to determine from the document alone. But one thing was undeniable. Diana had believed them. She had written them down, and she had wanted her sons to know. The letter then took another strange turn. Diana began discussing jewels. Not merely their monetary value, their history, their symbolism, their connection to generations of royal women. She warned her sons not to become obsessed with objects that appeared beautiful simply because they belonged to the crown. She suggested that some pieces carried stories that had never been publicly told. Then came another warning. She urged her sons to remember that a crown was not the same thing as a family. The words seemed to strike William particularly hard. Charles reached the bottom of the page. His voice cracked. He paused, then read the final sentence. "Do not let the palace turn you against each other." The room became silent again. But there was still more. The archivist reached into the vault and removed a second envelope. This one was smaller. Its seal was different. There was no royal insignia, only handwritten words. "To the one who knows." Charles frowned. He looked at the archivist, then at his sons. Nobody understood. He opened it. Inside was a single name. Catherine. William's face immediately changed. Harry looked at him. Charles stared at the paper as though the name itself made no sense. Catherine. Not a full name. Not a title. Just Catherine. At the time described by the document, Diana's sons were still young, and the woman who would eventually become William's wife had not yet entered his life. So why would Diana have written that name? Why would she have entrusted personal belongings to someone who apparently had not yet become part of the family? William whispered the name again. Catherine. Harry shook his head. Neither brother understood. Charles demanded an explanation. Who was she? How did Diana know her? Why had she been chosen? And why were her own sons apparently not the first recipients of these personal possessions? The archivist remained silent. Then Charles found another sentence. "She will know how to protect the boys when I am gone." William froze. Harry looked toward him. The implications were difficult to understand. Diana appeared to have imagined a future in which someone outside the immediate royal circle would play a role in protecting her children. At the bottom of the page was a final warning. If you deny her what is hers, the crown itself will turn against you. Charles stared at the words. Then the next document was opened. This one was darker. Diana wrote about what she feared would happen after her death. She believed that her public image could be reshaped. That history could be rewritten. That future generations might be taught to remember her as a problem, rather than as a woman caught inside an extraordinary and painful institution. She feared that the story of her life would eventually be reduced to headlines. She feared that her sons would hear conflicting versions of their mother's life and struggle to determine which one was true. Then she mentioned people she described as hidden allies, individuals who, according to her letter, had preserved material she believed could support her claims. Letters, photographs, recordings, private notes. She suggested that these people would remain silent unless the palace attempted to erase her legacy completely. Then came a phrase that seemed almost like a prediction. "The crown will crack from within." William picked up the page. He read the sentence himself. His face became tense. Diana then wrote directly to him. She warned him that becoming king would not make his life easier. It would make him more vulnerable. She warned him that people would attempt to influence him, that some would flatter him, others would frighten him. Some would tell him what they believed he needed to hear, and others would attempt to divide him from the people closest to him. Then came the passage about Harry. Diana described her younger son as the spare. But she used the phrase in a far more troubling way. She suggested that Harry could one day be treated as a convenient pawn, moved when necessary, sacrificed when necessary, protected when useful, ignored when inconvenient. Harry's face tightened. He looked down. Charles continued reading. Then he reached the final sentence of the section. "You already know what you've done." His voice broke. The paper slipped from his hand. For several seconds, Charles simply stood there. His eyes were wet. His shoulders appeared to sag. William looked at his father. Harry remained silent. Then the archivist moved toward a small wooden drawer hidden within the vault. Nobody had noticed it before. He inserted another key. The drawer opened. Inside was an old wooden box. There were no markings, no crest, no explanation. The archivist placed it on the table. His hand remained on the lid. He looked at the three men. Then he finally spoke. Once opened, there is no going back. Charles stared at him. William said nothing. Harry leaned forward. The lid was lifted. Inside were photographs, letters, audio tapes, small envelopes, documents. Everything appeared to have been arranged carefully. Some items had handwritten labels. For the people, keep safe, do not destroy. And one phrase that appeared on several pages, not to be burned. William picked up one of the tapes. It was old. The label carried Diana's handwriting. He placed it into the recorder. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then a familiar voice filled the room. Diana. Her voice was quiet, measured, but beneath it was an unmistakable sense of exhaustion. She spoke about feeling trapped. She spoke about being watched. She spoke about the pressure of living inside an institution where every mistake could become a national story. She described the feeling of becoming a ghost while still alive. She spoke about her children, about the fear that they would one day be forced to choose between being royal and being human. William's eyes filled with tears. Harry turned away. Charles sat motionless. Then Diana's voice became firmer. She said that she did not want her sons to spend their lives fighting over her. She did not want them to use her memory as a weapon against each other. She wanted them to remember that they were brothers first. The recording ended. Nobody moved. But there were still photographs. William picked them up one by one. Some showed private meetings. Others showed people Diana had mentioned in her notes. There were photographs of conversations between figures connected to the palace and members of the media. Some were completely innocent on their own. Others appeared suspicious when viewed alongside the accompanying notes. Diana had written explanations beneath several of them. She believed certain meetings had been part of a coordinated effort to control how the public viewed her. Then Charles found another letter. It was addressed to the press. It had never been sent. In it, Diana described what she believed had happened to her public image. She claimed that scandal after scandal had been used to strip away her credibility, that each new headline made it easier to dismiss the next thing she said, that eventually the public would be encouraged to see her not as a woman in pain, but as the source of the problem. The letter ended abruptly, but the box contained one final object, a small velvet pouch. Charles reached inside. His fingers closed around something hard. He pulled it out. A locket. An old locket Diana had apparently kept close to herself. Charles opened it. Inside was a photograph. He stared at it. His expression changed immediately. William noticed. "What is it?" Charles did not answer. Harry stood. "What did you find?" Still nothing. Charles closed the locket. His hands were trembling. The archivist stepped forward. He looked at Charles, then at the two princes. And once again, he offered a warning. But there was one envelope left. It was thicker than the others, heavier. Across the front, written in red ink, were 4 words. "My last word." The room became completely still. Charles picked it up. He looked toward William, then Harry. Neither son stopped him. He broke the seal. Inside was a final letter. At the top were 3 words, "To my people." This was different from everything that came before. There were no hidden names, no complicated accusations, no coded warnings. It was written directly to the people who had loved her. Diana thanked ordinary people. She thanked strangers. She thanked those who had stood outside gates simply to see her. She thanked those who had sent letters, those who had offered flowers, those who had told her that she mattered. She wrote that the affection of ordinary people had sometimes made her feel more alive than anything inside the palace ever could. Then she wrote about her sons. She admitted that she knew there was a possibility she would never see them become the men she hoped they would become. That thought, more than anything else, frightened her. She wanted William to become a man who understood responsibility without losing compassion. She wanted Harry to understand that being different did not mean being less important. And above all, she wanted them to remain brothers. Then the tone changed. Diana wrote that she had once dreamed of escaping. Not disappearing. Not abandoning her children. Simply finding somewhere quiet where she could live without being watched. She described imagining an ordinary life, a home, privacy, freedom. A place where her children could visit without cameras waiting outside. But she believed there were forces that would never allow that dream to become reality. Then came the demand. The monarchy, she wrote, could not survive forever by pretending nothing was wrong. It needed to change. It needed to listen. It needed to understand that tradition could not become an excuse for cruelty. And then she used words that would later become the most repeated line from the entire document. Change or perish. Charles stopped reading. He closed his eyes. William reached toward the letter. Charles handed it to him. William continued. Diana warned that institutions could survive criticism. They could survive scandal. They could even survive individual failures. But they could not survive when the people they served stopped believing them. She told her sons that the crown should never become more important than the people beneath it. Then came her final plea. William and Harry were to stay brothers. No matter what happened. No matter what people told them. No matter how many disagreements came between them. No matter how differently their lives eventually unfolded. She begged them not to let ambition destroy what grief had already tested. William read the final lines silently. Then he handed the letter to Harry. Harry read it. His eyes filled. Charles looked away. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Charles collapsed into his chair. His chest rose and fell heavily. Tears ran down his face. The room was filled with the kind of silence that only comes when everyone understands that something irreversible has happened. But the silence did not last. William stood. He held the documents tightly. He said that the truth could not remain buried. Harry looked at him. Charles immediately protested. He warned that releasing the material could destroy the monarchy. William replied that keeping it hidden could be worse. Harry remained caught between them. He had spent years living with the consequences of family conflict. The idea of opening another wound terrified him. But Diana's final words were impossible to ignore. She had not asked them to protect the institution at the expense of the truth. She had asked them to protect each other. Charles pleaded with his sons. He told them that once the material became public, there would be no way to control what happened next. The monarchy would be judged. People would choose sides. Old wounds would reopen. The country could become consumed by the story. William did not back down. He believed his mother's voice had already been silenced for too long. Harry finally stepped toward him. For the first time since the vault had been opened, the brothers stood side by side. Not because they agreed on everything, but because they both understood what the documents represented. The archivist slowly began closing the vault. The heavy door moved inward. The final glimpse of the chamber disappeared. Before the door shut completely, the archivist looked at the family. Then he spoke quietly. The crown will never be the same. The lock turned. The room was sealed again. But the secret was no longer sealed, because within hours, Rumors began spreading through the palace. Something had happened. Something significant. Staff members began receiving calls. Journalists began asking questions. Unusual activity around Windsor had already attracted attention. And then the first leak appeared. Diana's secret will had allegedly been uncovered. The story exploded. Headlines appeared across newspapers and digital platforms. Words such as betrayal, hidden will, and royal secret dominated the coverage. The public wanted answers. What had been inside the vault? Why had it remained hidden? Who had known about it? And what exactly had Diana written? Within days, fragments of the alleged documents began circulating. One sentence appeared everywhere. The crown will crack from within. For supporters of the monarchy, it was alarming. For Diana's admirers, it was confirmation of everything they had long believed. For the palace, it became a crisis. Crowds gathered outside royal residences. Flowers appeared. Candles burned through the night. People held photographs of Diana. Some demanded transparency. Others shouted for justice. The atmosphere became increasingly emotional. The gates of Buckingham Palace turned into a gathering place for people who wanted answers. The phrase, "tell the truth," could reportedly be heard among the crowds. And with every new alleged revelation, the pressure increased. Charles disappeared from public view. Days passed without a major appearance. Rumors about his condition spread. Some claimed he was furious. Others believed he was overwhelmed by grief. Those close to the situation described a man struggling beneath the weight of a legacy he could no longer control. Meanwhile, William began stepping forward. For perhaps the first time, the public saw him not simply as a prince. They saw him as Diana's son. He appeared before cameras. He carried copies of the documents. His expression was serious. There was no polished royal smile, no carefully rehearsed optimism. He looked directly into the cameras. Then he spoke. "My mother's voice will not be silenced." The crowd reacted immediately. Some people cried. Others applauded. The moment spread rapidly. But Harry eventually spoke too. His message was different. He did not call for destruction of the monarchy. He did not call for revenge. Instead, he spoke about the family behind the institution. He acknowledged that the past had caused pain. He acknowledged that the brothers had experienced their own struggles. And he reminded the public that beneath the titles were two sons who had lost their mother. "We loved her," he said. Those three words carried enormous weight. Because whatever people believed about the documents, whatever arguments existed over the monarchy, one fact remained impossible to dispute. William and Harry had both lost Diana. They had both grown up carrying that loss. And now, according to the story of the vault, they were being forced to confront a version of her final thoughts that had remained hidden for decades. The monarchy appeared stronger than any individual, but the vault had revealed something different. Institutions are built by people, and people carry secrets. They carry guilt. They carry grief. They carry memories. Sometimes those memories remain hidden for years. Sometimes decades. Until one day a lock turns, a door opens, and everything that was supposed to remain buried suddenly stands in the light. For Charles, the discovery was devastating. For William, it became a call to confront the past. For Harry, it reopened wounds he had spent years trying to understand. And for the public, Diana's alleged final message became something larger than a royal scandal. It became a question. How much of history should remain hidden simply because revealing it might hurt the people who inherited it? The palace could close the vault. It could lock the door. It could return the documents to darkness. But it could not erase what had already been read. It could not erase the sound of Diana's voice from the recording. It could not erase the words she had written for her sons. And it could not erase the question she had left behind. What happens when the institution you are born to serve becomes the very thing you fear? That was the question William and Harry were now forced to confront. Outside, the crowds continued to gather. Inside, the palace tried to regain control. But the old certainty was gone. The monarchy had survived wars. It had survived political crises. It had survived scandals. It had survived generations of change. But this was different. Because this time, the challenge came from the voice of someone the public had never stopped loving: Diana. And whether every word in those documents was accepted, questioned, or disputed, the emotional impact was already impossible to contain. Her sons had heard her. The country had begun listening. And the vault that had remained silent for decades had finally opened. The truth, whatever form it ultimately took, was no longer safely hidden behind an iron door. It was out. And once the royal family had heard Diana's final words, there was no way to make them unheard. The crown could continue. The ceremonies could continue. The processions could continue. The palace gates could close again. But something inside the House of Windsor had changed. A secret that had been preserved for the future had finally reached the people it was supposedly meant for. And perhaps that was Diana's final message all along. Not revenge, not destruction, but remembrance. Remember who you are before you remember what you represent. Remember family before duty. Remember people before institutions. And above all, remember that silence may protect a secret for a time, but it cannot protect it forever. Because eventually, every sealed vault has a key. Every locked door has a moment when it must open. And every buried story waits for the day someone finally becomes brave enough to read it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.